on YouTube in about 30 seconds. So if you just wait for the
words we all want to hear.
I was going to say, I felt a lot better not having heard that. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
It's just a Sunday night chat amongst a few friends.
Yeah, we're at the pub. Just down the pub, sitting outside.
Here we go. We should be ready to start whenever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Importance of Uplit session. So my name is Kat Walker, and I'm joined by 5 other exciting new Uplit authors to discuss why Uplit is so important at the moment. Now, some of you might be wondering what even is Uplit, and that's a very good question. It's a fairly new literary term on the block. It's sometimes described as writing that's optimistic, as life-affirming, or even as comforting. So you might think anything by Matt Haig, or particularly Rainer Wind's The Salt Path, or Rachel Joyce's The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. But Uplit actually is quite a diverse category, and it does include some unlikely candidates, such as Gail Honeyman's Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. And I think you're going to see a lot of that diversity represented in tonight's panel, who each come from a slightly different place around Uplit. And I've read all of their books, and you're certainly in for a treat. But just before we go into the chat, there's going to be a couple of ways that you can interact with the panel tonight. So firstly, please ask any questions that occur to you in the chat box or in the Q&A section, not quite sure which, one or the other. We'll figure it out. And we'll try and answer as many of those as we can at the end of the session. And secondly, to liven up the Zoom world that we've all been inhabiting, we've taken a leaf out of Ramesh Ranganathan's Book of Ranganation, and we're going to be playing Trousers or No Trousers tonight. So one of our panelists is not wearing trousers. Can you guess which one it is? Answers in the chat panel, please. And all, not all, no, nearly all will be revealed later on. But now let's get straight into it and introduce you to our panelists and their uplifting books. I think I'll choose Nicola to go first.
Oh, thanks. I'm Nicola Gill, and I had 2 books out last year. My debut, The Neighbours, and then in September, my second book, We Are Family. And I should show you the books, but they're right behind me. Here they are. Ta-da! There they are.
Okay, and next, Victoria.
Hello, I'm Victoria Dowd. Obviously, you can probably read that at the bottom there. And I write classic whodunits, but with a kind of very dark comedic edge. And the first was The Smart Woman's Guide to Murder, which is presumably appearing backwards there. And the second is Body on the Island, both of which are out. And the third one is coming out soon, I hope. And they follow a family who are called the Smarts, and they basically don't get on very well, but kind of find a way through the various murders that occur in their lives.
Next, Gill.
Yeah, I'm Gillian Harvey, and my debut novel, Everything is Fine, was out last May, and my next novel, Perfect on Paper, is out in a couple of weeks, and subtle promo in the background.
Matson.
Hello, I'm Matson Taylor, and my book is The Miseducation of Evie Epworth, and the paperback came out last Thursday, so just a few days ago, and it's a sort of hopefully a funny book about lots of quite serious, sad things. There we go.
And last but not least, Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Ewins. My book is called We Are Animals. I didn't realise it was uplit when I was submitting it to places. I called it comedy, and I also called it contemporary fiction. I called it lots of things, and now I know that uplit is a thing. I feel like it fits quite nicely in there, and it's just a book about a couple of, like, an older guy and a younger guy who meet on a beach, and each chapter has a different animal in it, and the animals have little stories of their own.
Brilliant, thank you. And obviously I've said I'm Kat Walker. My book is The Scoop. It was published by Red Door Press last March. It's, I guess it's a road trip book. I mean, very much like Tim, I was not aware that it was uplit, but I think I'm told that I owe my being published to the fact that it is uplit. I waited 13 years to be published, and apparently I've just hit the zeitgeist. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It tells you a lot about how publishing works. But I think you can sort of see how, you know, all of the authors on the panel are coming at uplit from a different direction. And Tim and I have sort of said a little bit about the fact that we weren't really aware of uplit. Do any of the other authors want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose I was thinking that my books were humour, or my first book before. And then what I found was, whenever it was listed anywhere, it was like chick lit or women's fiction. And I felt there's nothing wrong with women, but I feel a little bit like it's kind of, it gets shoehorned into this place where maybe Nick Hornby wouldn't be shoehorned. And I just think, well, there needs to be a new term. And I feel like uplit is kind of pushing out chick lit and saying, you know, these books are funny to men too. Even men can understand the humour if they really try very hard. So that's what I'm thinking with mine.
Well, I mean, we've got two men on this panel, which, you know, and I know obviously you can have, you know, men writing chick lit as well, but I think it was time that kind of label was done away with, along with, what is it, women's fiction?
Yeah,
we always,
yeah.
We always moan about.
I submitted mine as women's fiction once as well. Did know what
you?
it was. Yeah, I just don't know I didn't really know what any of the genres were, to be honest. Turns out I always read uplit, but I just didn't know. So.
Brilliant. And yeah, Victoria, how do you feel about, because yours is more a sort of murder mystery?
It is, yeah, and I don't think that is the sort of the kind of normal idea of uplit, but I like the idea of there being a little bit of comedy in a whodunit, not kind of farce so much, because I think that has been done. But if you read the kind of old classics like Agatha Christie or Marjorie Allingham, they are very tongue-in-cheek a lot of the time. There is some very dark comedy, because obviously it's quite a hard subject to have comedy around, because someone's just been brutally slain in the middle of the cocktail party. But the fact that it is often in the middle of the cocktail party is quite funny in itself. And people are literally, stepping over the body to analyse things and say, you know, aha, but this is over here. And, it's not as dark as it can be, but there are, it does go to some dark places. So I think uplit does actually takes people through those kind of very dark moments in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicola, would you, I mean, I've just been reading your book most recently. Did you think of yours as uplit when you were writing it?
Yeah, I think I did actually. So I've always been always been a fan of uplit, because it's a relatively recent term, isn't it? But I do like it, and I read a lot of books in that genre. So yeah, I think I did know that, and I'm definitely more comfortable with that than some of the other labels that people stick on it, because my books aren't fluffy. There are funny bits, but there are also sort of darker moments and more serious subjects, and I like that. I like reading that kind of stuff, and I like writing that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think I was reading about what uplit is, and a lot of the descriptions were talking about how you really empathize with the characters, and you get to like them and you get to care about them. And I think that's true for all of our books. Hopefully that's what all authors aim for, isn't it?
Yeah. Well,
next we thought we'd talk a bit about, or give you a bit of advice. I hate saying writing advice, but because it's not as if we're the absolute experts in the field, but I suppose we are, published authors. So we wanted to talk a bit about writing uplit, and especially at the moment. And I'm going to hand you over to my co-host for the evening, Gill Harvey, for this bit. And Gill hosts a fortnightly uplit book chat live on Instagram. And she also writes a monthly column under the covers for Writing Magazine. So over to you, Gill.
Thank you. So the first question we were going to think about as a group was the importance. I think a lot of people have been reaching for uplit literature recently. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I did an interview with the head of Barnes and Noble in America, and he was saying how lots of people had gone initially at the beginning of the pandemic. People had gone for authors that they knew really well, like the familiar, or they'd gone for quite hard-hitting books. And now I think, and there was a point, I think, that humour seemed to be a little bit misplaced or lost, and it felt almost wrong to be writing something humorous. And now I think we're just all ready for it, aren't we? And so that's really something that, and I think comedy, I know that I watched one particular stand-up from Ricky Gervais recently, and he said about how he realised as he was growing up that comedy can heal. And I think maybe that's something that we can all really relate to, certainly with our writing. So we're going to talk about whether you can effectively address these darker subjects within humour, and how we've managed to keep writing that humour despite the dark times. And I think, Victoria, we're going to come to you first for that.
Yeah, I think that what you said about it can heal is really important, because I came at the sort of the murder mystery book from the point of view of thinking, okay, death is really central to these books, but it's often overlooked. You know, that nobody talks about death, nobody talks about grief in a murder mystery. Nobody actually grieves the person who is dead in the center of the book. So my main character, who is a fairly unreliable narrator, is absolutely plagued by grief, and it is a huge part of her. But then it also impacts on her relationship with her mother, which brings in a very dark comedic side. And I really wanted to look at the concept of, can you have these women kind of banging up against each other all of the time and really jarring with each other, and also have that softer side of the grief being dealt with, but also sometimes that does lead to comedy. And I love the fact that you can have that absolutely incongruous moment where basically you're laughing in a funeral and you shouldn't be, and you absolutely know that you shouldn't be, and it's so overwhelming and powerful, the emotion, that it kind of seeps off into other areas. So, you know, I used to be a criminal barrister for a long time, and we would often get the giggles at the most inappropriate moments in court, and you had to try and control that, because you shouldn't be laughing. You should not be laughing at, you know, this terrible incident that's occurred. But I think that often people do, and I think it helps to have that kind of overlap of emotions. You know, nobody wants to go to the funeral where no one talks about the funny thing that the person did who's passed away. You know, you want to try and cherish those bits as well. So it was actually quite interesting to try and do that within a kind of, you know, locked room murder mystery situation at the same time, and bring in slightly more human aspects to it, hopefully.
No, that's really interesting. It made me think when you were talking about that, I don't know if anyone saw that viral clip, I guess, of that guy who at his funeral, when they were lowering the coffin, he'd recorded himself knocking and going, hello, what's that bloke in a collar doing?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I thought, what a generous thing to know that you're obviously going to be dead when that happens, but to want to give that to people, I think is really, really sweet and really giving. There's certainly, definitely darkness there in your books, Victoria, but I like that aspect of, and you're dead right about that. It's all the stuff of life, isn't it? Whether we like it or not, it's there, isn't it? So, Matson, what about you? I know that obviously there's some different subjects addressed within your book, and I think you managed to kind of keep the humour going throughout. But how did you find addressing those different topics and subjects?
It all came very naturally, to be honest. I'd never heard of uplit, so even when I was writing, I wasn't thinking of uplit. The first time I'd heard of the phrase uplit was when I met my agent, and she said, "Oh, well, this is an uplit book." And I was like, "What's that?" And the way that she explained what an uplit book is pretty much how we've all done it. Oh, it's like so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so. And it's by saying who it's like. And I was like pressing her, and I came out thinking, well, in my head, E.M. Forster is uplit as well. It does kind of like lots of those similar things. So I was quite confused. And the writing of that, I've managed to write an uplit book. And I think the reason I wrote an uplit book was because I was trying to cheer myself up. So I wrote the book, I started writing the book in January 2016, and I was having a fairly bad time on various fronts. And I just wanted to cheer myself up, really. So I genuinely wrote the book to cheer myself up. And I thought, if it makes me smile, well, I actually wasn't even really thinking about readers, actually. So I wasn't even thinking, if it makes me smile, it will make somebody else smile. I wasn't thinking about that at all. I was just thinking, it will make me smile. And I'd always wanted to write a novel. It's my first novel. And I think I just wanted to get to the end of the novel and think, wow, to write a novel is really like climbing a mountain. So I just wrote the novel to cheer me up and make me happy. And I think if you write something and it cheers you up and makes you happy, it probably will do the same to other people as well. But I didn't want to write just a frothy comedy book like none of us. I think all of our books, there's a lot going on underneath it. And I think, like with me, that came in the kind of the rewriting. We often talk about writing a book, and I think the first draft is really we all just tell ourselves the story and get the mechanics of it all. And then the real writing comes after that. And for me, the comedy came fairly easily initially. And then the kind of the more poignant, quieter sides came on the second draft, when you can really start digging down deep and thinking about the emotions of the characters. And then suddenly, at the end of all that, mixing the light and the dark, you get to the end, and I'd made an uplit book without knowing it. But I always knew that I wanted, I shouldn't really say whether we want a happy ending or something, but I wanted people to smile and entertain, I suppose, yeah.
That's really interesting, sort of writing yourself into a better mood kind of thing. I like that, because I can relate. It's all about me, obviously. Sorry, I'll relate everything back to myself now. But it just really chimed in with me, I have to say, because when I wrote Everything is Fine, and Everything's Fine is probably my 7th novel that I've written. Just there's them all in a drawer. So, but I had postnatal depression and blah, and the book I'd written before was quite emotive, and this one I just carved out an hour. I had a lot of young children at the time. I still have a lot of children, they're just a bit older now, and I just carved out an hour every night. And I think probably I was doing a similar thing, like you wallow in darkness, and so you kind of start looking for the light. And that's a really interesting way of, perhaps that's why we've managed to carry on writing during these kind of dark times, because it helps sometimes to escape to that world where those complications don't exist. So, Nicola, sorry, I was just looking at my little script. So I know that your most recent book, particularly, We Are Family, does address some sort of darker issues. How did you find sort of weaving that into Uplit, and did it sort of help to have both of those topics in there?
Yeah, it definitely helped. I think that, I'm always a great believer in the fact that genres pick authors rather than authors picking genres. So I think I write in the way I write, and it wasn't particularly a choice. It's just, the things that interest me and the way I talk, I think. But I was always only interested in having the light and the dark together. I didn't want to write something that was completely frothy, and I didn't want to write something that was completely sad and dismal, because, goodness knows there's enough of that in life, especially this last year. But it's funny, because earlier you were quoting Ricky Gervais, and he was asked once if there was any subject that you shouldn't joke about. And he said, well, that's as ridiculous a question as, is there any subject you shouldn't talk about? And I rather agree with him on that. And I think that you can talk about any subject with humour. It's just how you do it. So, for example, you know, We Are Family, you know, they it's two sisters and they've just lost their mum, and it's about grief and bereavement. But there are lots of funny things in it. And that's, you know, my real life experience of that as well. I mean, I remember when my dad died, and I was very close to my dad and he was fantastic, but he was abroad when he died. And I got a couple of days later a phone call from a very irate sounding lady, and she said, "Your father's missed his plane." And she sounded really annoyed, like it was his fault, like he'd just been sort of, you know, mucking about in duty free and tried on one too many ill-advised pairs of sunglasses. Mm-hmm. And it was so ridiculous. And it was particularly funny to me because my dad was sort of so punctual by nature. And the fact that this woman was sort of so irritated, you know, my brother and I, when I put the phone down, we started laughing. And, you know, obviously we were still sad and devastated, but it was a moment of levity. So I'm really comfortable with those two things rubbing up alongside each other, because to me, that's life. And I think all our books, they all do have an element of that.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's a really good way of putting it, having that moment within grief. You can still laugh. It doesn't mean that you don't care about something. In fact, sometimes I think you have to really understand something in order to find humour in it. And so perhaps it shows real empathy to be able to write about all subjects, as you say, with a little bit of light as well. Kat, I was going to hand back over to you now, I think, for this bit, for the next.
Yeah. So I was actually just going to thinking about jumping in on that, because when we were talking about putting this panel together, we were talking about, you know, how all of our books really touch on subjects that are the darkness to the light, you know, and that you kind of need that balance. And I, you know, when people kind of say, you know, what's my book about and what genre is it in, and I say it's uplit, and they're like, oh, you know, and I see in their heads they're thinking light and fluffy, or, you know, whatever that sort of images that's conjured up by uplit. And I'm thinking, but, you know, I also talk about concentration camps and, you know, and really kind of some very dark material. But I did want to try to do that with humour. And, and it is a very fine balance, isn't it? Trying to be, I don't think you're trying to be funny. You're trying to all the time. It's that you're trying to do things with humour, and sometimes with a gentle humour, so that I just think it's easier to get a point across, isn't it, if you make it sort of slightly funny. But I think the other thing we were talking about when we were trying to put the panel together was that humour is very subjective, and that, you know, how do you tackle that situation when you think something is absolutely hilarious, but your reader or your agent or your publisher just doesn't get it? You know, how much do you kind of put yourself behind your humour and fight for it? And we were thinking about, you know, when humour goes wrong, and the fact that you can't make everyone laugh all of the time. And, you know, does that even matter when you're trying to write something in this kind of genre? And actually, I was going to let me just try and there was a cartoon that someone shared the other day on our Facebook group, and I said that I was going to try and put it in here, because, I don't know if that's going to work. I've pasted that, but that doesn't look like a cartoon. Right. Well, I'll try to explain it. It was basically a series of images of a writer sitting away at a typewriter computer, saying, you know, oh, this is hilarious, and then stopping themselves and thinking, oh, is it hilarious? No, it's awful. No, it's really not funny. Oh, no, it is. It is hilarious. It is hilarious. Is it? And just completely doubting themselves. And at the end, you finally get to the reader picking up the book and just going, So, you know, it's that sort of process of, you know, am I actually being funny? And I think, you know, my own kind of take on that is just to be yourself, not to try and force the humour. Gill, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I was just thinking that a lot of us have said already tonight that we didn't really think, I'm going to write a book that's humorous. We just wrote. And I think when I wrote my first, Everything Is Fine, my first published novel, I think it helps the thinking that maybe no one's ever going to read it. I think you can be quite brave when you think,
it's quite easy. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's it. So, I mean, I didn't particularly think, I mean, I knew it wasn't a depressing novel. It was only really when my editor said how laugh out loud it was for her that I realised, and I suppose I dialed that up when I did the edits a little bit more as well. And I think when you can't be self-conscious with humour, and I think I have the most fun, the most humorous moments either with my family, with my kids, with my brothers and sisters, and when I was younger and actually had friends and go to the pub and stuff like that. I remember when I had a glass of wine, I'd be a little bit less self-conscious. I think that it's that sort of, don't judge yourself, because there are people like you out there, and if you think it's funny, you've either got to go for it or not do it at all, I think. Because if you do it halfway, it's just a bit, you've got to really go for it and just be positive about it. And that's not easy. I mean, it's certainly not easy if you were, I don't think I could ever do anything like stand-up. I'd never be brave enough to do that. But I think when you write it, you can be really brave, because the first reader is usually yourself reading it back. And I think that there's always this fear, isn't there, of embarrassing yourself. But I know that I like people that when I watch comedy, when I read comedy, I think if you're authentically yourself, and that's what I always think whenever I write something, if I write an opinion piece about something, I always think, well, this is who I am, and if people like it, that's because they like me or they get me, and if they don't, well, I haven't really lost anything, because at least I've just been myself. And I think there's just sort of a time when you've got to kind of own that a little bit, I suppose. That said, I did have to take some things out of Perfect on Paper because I think I'd been hanging out with the kids too much, and maybe the humour had gone a little bit juvenile for that, and so I had to tidy a few bits away there. But I think just being brave, and if you think something's funny, that moment passes very quickly if you don't say it. So just going for it is my advice on that, I think.
Yeah. Well, talking of stand-ups, Tim, you were a stand-up comedian. For all I know, you still are. I think you did it. I think your bio says you did it for 8 or 10 years before this. So how did you find bringing that into your writing? Because for me, and I hope this is not seen as a criticism at all, I think your sense of humour is sort of quite absurdist, and you know, that works very well with stand-up. But how did you find trying to get that on paper?
So I don't do stand-up anymore. I stopped to write the novel because writing a novel is much more fun than going to a basement every night in London. So I mean, I really enjoyed it for 8 years, but I decided to stop for the writing. But I'm going to sort of, I agree with pretty much everything everyone said, but for me, it was a bit different. So I actually started writing to write a funny book is what I aimed to do. I was like, right, well, I've done stand-up. That's the only thing I really do other than my day job. So I tried to put jokes in it. So and in a way, my books, I think, hopefully worked, because I started writing a funny book. It took me 4 years. And in that 4 years, a few bad things happened to me. Not loads, but when they did, I just put them in the book, because it was like, I guess, getting it out there. Admittedly, at that time, to no one other than my wife, who knew about everything anyway. But because of that, it starts off funny, and then the bits that happen that aren't funny or a bit darker kind of come as a surprise, because it starts off with actual punchlines and jokes. So it's been a bit different for me for that. But talking about how do you go for, like, you write something down and then how do you do if people don't find it funny? I had 8 years of saying something on stage for the first time and then some people not laughing. And how you handle that is you just stand there and say something else that's not funny and let that last 10 minutes and go home and pretend it never happened. But the difference is when you're on stage, you can say something like I kind of had like a set that I knew was fine. And if I had something new, I'd put it in. And if it wasn't funny, I'd just jump back to something that was funny. Whereas with writing, you kind of write it and you're like, well, never gonna, even when people read it, I don't know if they're laughing or not. Like, you get a review, but there's like 300 pages and the review's like a paragraph. So you're like, but what bit was funny? I don't even know for the next one. but that's cool. And I mean, when I was writing it, I gave loads of. I'm not one of those authors that holds it all back and then gives it at the end. Every time I wrote a word, I was trying to send it to my mates, and then I got a bit of feedback that way. And the feedback I generally got was, my wife liked it, but there wasn't really any plot. So at one point she was like, I'm enjoying it, but you're going to have to add a plot here, which I did. So, it's lucky she was there. My mum doesn't really like it. It's not her kind of book. Although she might be watching it. It was only the first chat, so she likes it now. Like my friends tended to like it. And then all of a sudden, when a couple of things happened that made it a bit darker, one of my mates was like, well, the last chapter was really sad. So what the hell is going on? But yeah, no, it's very different to stand up. There's no immediate, and that goes both ways. Like the things that weren't fun. So I once did a stand-up gig to. I'm going off point probably a bit, but I once did a stand-up gig to one person, which I guess is a bit like. It was horrible, but it was a bit like what you write words, and then although loads of people hopefully read it, it's on a one-to-one basis in a way, because every reader's just reading it for themselves. So it was a bit like that, I guess, although I didn't realize it then. But it was just like all the chairs were sat out. One guy sat in the middle with his arms folded, leaning back, and he wasn't in the mood for it. I don't know what he was doing.
Did he heckle you?
No, he didn't heckle me.
That would be brilliant.
If he did, that would just be like an argument.
An insult. It's an insult.
So
or a review.
Yeah, it was the equivalent of two people having with only a one-sided conversation where one person's really prepared for it and one person didn't want to turn up. It was mental. I left before the whole thing ended. But I'll stick to writing books. I think it's much nicer. Like you get a glass of wine with it, don't you?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And obviously it's probably slightly different for you because you had this experience as a stand-up comedian. But did anyone else kind of set out to not necessarily, tell jokes as such, but to be, consciously funny, to make it a funny book? Anyone?
I definitely did. I wanted funny bits in mine. I'd had funny scenes, and I really wanted to make people laugh out loud, which is quite hard. But I did have that aim, I think. Yeah, I didn't want it to be kind of like a really subtle book where you just smile. I wanted a few guffaws as well. So you have to choose. I mean, I think all of us, you have to choose your guffaws. You can't have like a massive guffaw every paragraph because it'll just get really annoying. And I reckon probably all of us will have moments in the book that we really like. You think, if I have to choose one paragraph for someone to read, that's the one, and we all know which one we want them to read. So I reckon we probably all did a bit. I definitely did anyway.
Yeah, I did actually.
A little bit, I think. But mine was more kind of trying to get that family dynamic around quite strong women. And there was a lot of sharpness. And then the first few people who read it went, this is absolutely hilarious. And is it? Are they just being mean? And, there is that crossover, isn't there? Especially when you're in your own family and, your great aunt's doing something or saying something that is utterly offensive but can be quite hilarious.
Yeah, and that's that subjective thing again, isn't it? And that comes into everyone's sense of humor. I did actually have a reviewer say that my book was relentlessly funny, and looking back on it, I thought, is that actually a criticism? was he sort of actually saying I was trying too hard? But I think there is a sense that when you're editing, I think one of us said this already, when you're editing you go back through and you take out the bits that aren't so funny and you leave in the bits that are funny. So I suppose in that sense it gets iteratively funnier, hopefully, if that's what you're kind of aiming for. So I think there's definitely a sense of that.
Just to answer the question, sorry, is it just chipping? I was just going to say that for me, the second book, Perfect on Paper, I was writing that with more of a knowledge that that's what people thought of the first book, that it was funny. And that was interesting because I suppose I chose quite a funny concept for that, just the idea of this woman who is quite successful and seems to have everything, but feels completely invisible. And I took the idea of kind of midlife invisibility and tried to turn that on its head. But the whole concept is funny, and there's individual funny bits. But I think the feedback I've got so far is that it's really uplifting and joyful, but I haven't had as many laugh out loud moments, I think, as the other ones. So it's quite interesting how what you're aiming to do and what actually comes out. I think it's got a lot to do with how you feel at the time and what you're trying to push through in the book. And there can be lightness and laugh out loud, but it's often what you set out thinking you're going to do isn't what you actually achieve, I think. And that's usually for a good reason, usually because your subconscious is pushing something else as well.
That's a really good point. And I think it's another thing that we've touched on before when we've all been talking, is that, you know, all of our first books, I think I'm right in saying, would have been written before the pandemic. But some of people's second books, at least in part, will have been written during the pandemic. And I happen to know that Tim's second book has gone a completely different direction. Is that the same for everyone? Or maybe, Tim, you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, I don't mind. The reason it's gone in a different direction is when I started writing animals, I was like I say, trying to be funny. And then some more stuff happened in my life, nothing particularly bad, stuff that happens in life. But then the second book started, I guess it's more depressing, in all honesty. But I still think, and this is kind of goes back to what we were saying about uplit at the beginning, I still think it fits in uplit. Because whereas this is funny with dark moments, it's like the exact opposite. It's not dark, it's more real, I guess, but with uplifting moments. And it's still about the feeling. I don't think there are many uplit books that don't have like a darker undertone at some point, if you know what I mean. But it's more about reading it and just feeling kind of happy. Because even like I say, my second book, it's about an elderly couple split up, put into different care homes. But it's more about their relationship and the people, and it makes you feel good because of who they are. I can't see a thing. I've got sun in the only eye I can see. Sorry. But yeah, no, I but I didn't try to write something similar to the first one because, to be honest, when I started it, I didn't think my first one was ever going to get published. So I tried to write something different. That's the truth.
And what about Matson? I know, are you writing a follow-up to Evie?
I am. I'm writing EV2 now, and I found, I think probably we've all had exactly the same thing said to us. Oh, lockdown, it must be a fantastic time for you writers to write because you don't have to do anything other than write. And I mean, I don't know, I personally find it very hard to write during lockdown because I need the social contact of normal life and all that stimulation going on, and just the buzz of being with friends and seeing funny things happening and just listening to the lilt of various conversations that you overhear. I kind of need all of that going on, and then I can come back and just lock myself away and write and try and be uplift or funny or sad or anything. But having just spent all the time on our own, I suppose for all of us, I found that really hard to then go off and write as well.
And the kids going to school, that could help. Yeah, kids.
What about everybody else? How has anybody found it a lot better writing during lockdown?
No, definitely not. I mean, apart from anything else, all the doom scrolling doesn't really put one in the mood, does it? To sit down and write funny. I mean, I have sometimes found it a really welcome escape to be able to get into my fictional world, which, where no one wears masks, there's no, manic hand washing, and you can actually touch another human. So yeah, that has been quite nice. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really challenging, and I think writers, they feed off other people and situations, and we're all very curious, which is just a polite way of saying nosy. So yeah, we need other people. Definitely.
I found the bit that I've been quite, not by lockdown itself, but by the kind of underlying sense of unease and stress has kind of activated my creativity a little bit, because I think I write myself out of certain emotions. And I don't know, in a way, I always find there's sort of life stuff and there's stress, and then on top surfs all my creativity. And I think sometimes it drives me to write a lot more, and I never know whether that's a good thing, but I've been quite prolific. I suppose hiding from the kids in my office and saying I've got to do something is quite useful as well. So yeah, it's been a mixture for me.
And are you finding it more difficult to be to write uplit, or is it just the same?
I think when I wrote Perfect on Paper, it was before the pandemic, and then it got edited during the pandemic. But I've actually written 2 books during the pandemic as well. And I think, I don't know, because I mean, my lockdown has been very different from other people's, I think, because we're very, very lucky. We live in rural France. Don't always feel lucky living here, but when that kind of thing happens, you kind of do. So 5 kids, everyone's being silly all the time. You're keeping the kids' spirits up. So I've probably had more laugh out loud moments in my actual life because I've just been in this bubble with my kids and they're just ridiculous. So I don't know, I think it's maybe helped me to find that kind of sweet spot between the pathos and the humour that we all try and write to, really, for some of the time at least.
That's incredibly prolific, though, writing 2 books in a pandemic. You're putting us all to shame, especially me, who's not writing at the moment.
I didn't think any good, so.
And Victoria, are the bodies piling up at your house?
Yes, definitely. And there's been definitely a lot of murderous situations. I have to say the second one is a lot darker. I don't know whether it's because of that, but I've spent a whole lifetime, as many whodunit writers do, trying to isolate people. And they came out in the middle of us all being isolated. It's just, oh my God, I've looked for forever the way you can isolate people and, keep them cut off from their loved ones, family, friends, people in the village, shops. And then, of course, they came out in the middle of that. And then people are like, it's easy to isolate people. So I'm having to be ever more creative about how to, cut people off from the real world. And
I thought you were going to say something else after cut then, but
yeah. But I find it's great fun. And I've also found that because I think, the people you've actually lived with during this, you're incredibly close to, and you get even closer to them, particularly, older kids and stuff who, I bounce ideas off them and, that's a bit old fashioned. No, that's not funny. This is funny. That's not fun. And they're much more involved. So it's less isolating for me. And it's been quite a good thing in a way that, everybody doesn't just go off to work, go out of the house, go to school. Everybody's around and they're all very much a part of it. So, my son has created the worlds that I've created. He's created them in Lego for me.
Oh, brilliant.
Because it was a village. It's, your classic Agatha Christie style village. And there were quite a lot of people moving around all the time. And I thought, oh, no, I don't think that, the housekeeper was here at this particular point. Now I don't know where she was. And you're flicking backwards and forwards all the time. So we just created, in one of those afternoons where it's cold, rainy, nobody knows what they're doing. We're all stuck in the house together. We just created the village out of Lego, and we had all the people. So all the, characters from the book are created in Lego, and it was great fun. And actually, a lot of the time you can't say that about writing books, that it was a great fun day of writing the book. Sometimes it's a big slog. Sometimes it goes really well and you're very pleased and it's, it's an academic kind of day, but not that it was a great fun day writing the book. And actually it's included all of the family in it a lot more, I think.
Brilliant. That's really good to hear. Now I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I feel like we should probably go and answer some questions from people. And I also know that everyone's gearing up for line of duty, so we don't want to overrun too much. Oh, and I was just trying to have a look at the chat to see if anyone's voted on the trousers or no trousers. I think I've seen a vote for Matson. Where is it? Someone's said they're guessing it's Matson, but they think he might have some I'm in the Richard and Judy book club boxes on. Oh, Matson, was that you or one of your family that put that? Just getting that sneaky little...
No. It was a very good plug, though. Thank you to whoever said it.
It's a very good plug.
I owe you a beer, whoever it was.
Well, I shall hand back over to Gill, back by popular demand, mine, for the Q&A.
Okay, so we've had some questions that have come through on Twitter earlier in the week, and we've got a couple up there tonight. But do add your questions on if you've got anything you'd like to ask, and pop your guests in the chat if you think you've worked out who's feeling a bit cold on the lower half. If we just start with one that came in on Twitter. It says, how can you bring humour into writing about very dark or difficult topics without sounding insensitive? I think, Nicola, you touched on that a bit. Maybe I could put that one to you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would just reiterate what I said before, really. I don't think any subject is off limits in itself. It's just how you deal with it. And I think that there, even in the darkest times, there will be some humour, and often that's the thing that gets us through and helps us to process and, come through the other side. So yeah, no, I'm absolutely, for me, that there's no subject that you can't tackle with a bit of humour. Just got to do it in the right way.
And Penny Batchelor has asked whether we're all going to stick with uplit or whether we've got plans to branch out into another genre. Now, I know a couple of us have answered that tonight already. I think, Victoria, are you going to be continuing with the smart sort of series, or yeah?
But for the next couple of books, but who knows? I mean, it's kind of, I kind of like historical fiction and write quite a lot of that, but I also write a lot of more kind of supernatural ghost stories, that kind of thing, gothic. And I really, I don't think you can introduce, that may be the only thing you can't introduce humour into, gothic literature. Possibly. I mean, Stella Gibbons got away with it, with the sort of, but I don't think you can, because you then break the spell a little bit, I think.
True. Yeah, you need that kind of build up of tension, don't you?
Yeah, although that might be quite funny to do.
I can remember we'd be at university and reading a Gothic novel, a Victorian Gothic novel, and it was hilarious, but unintentionally so.
Yeah, I love that. I think that perhaps there is, maybe there's room for humour in Gothic. I don't know what would you call that? Goth uplit.
Gothlit,
yeah.
Goth.
Yeah, goth. No, that's going to be wrong. That's going to get, you can't put that on the internet.
Kat, I don't know if you're working on a second novel at the moment. Are you thinking about one, or?
I'm not goth up. Someone's just put, goth up. I'm not actually. I'm sort of the odd one out that I did my sort of first one, and that may be, well, for the moment, that's kind of my lot, because I've kind of got to go back to work. It feels awful. I feel like I've kind of been living in this lovely authorial bubble, and now I have to go back to the horrible real world, where I have to earn slightly more of a living from doing other stuff. But I do have a plan. Let's call them plans. I do have plans to write more stuff. And in fact, I want to be Victoria when I grow up, because I think I would.
No one's ever said that.
I thought
Not my kids.
Because I feel like I'd like to do, something along the murder mystery line, but I feel like it would, just because of the way that I am and the way that I write, I feel like it would somehow naturally be funny. That sounds very like I'm bigging myself up, but it's just, the way that I write, I feel that I have to put the humor into stuff. So it would, I guess it would be kind of, along the lines that you're writing. So there you go.
Excellent. More of it.
And Matson, is EV2, I assume, still going to be uplit?
Yeah, I can't remember who it was who said. I think it might have been Nicola who said that if we don't choose our books, they choose us. And I think, you know, I sort of, Evie has chosen me, and when the book came, it sort of came to me as three books. So I've got an Evie trilogy, and then I've got another couple of books which are non-Evie, which will be, yeah, slightly different, I suppose, but hopefully still uplifting and enjoyable, and, you know, all of these things that we want to be.
So let's go to another question. So Louise Fain has asked, do you feel any pressure, having published one book which has been marketed and reviewed as funny, to produce another and another in that genre, which makes it harder to write funny? Tim, do you want to? I know you.
I've pretty much.
Aren't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I've already said. I mean, but yes, and like I said, I started writing my second one. My first one hadn't found a publisher, and then I had my second one, sent it to the publisher, and luckily they like it. But I was like, well, I've written something completely different, and now the pressure's on. But I've already got a book, so I'm just going to give you the book I've got, even though it's not the same at all. And I probably missed a trick there, but luckily they like it. So, and you know, I'm proud of it. It's very different.
I think probably as well. I mean, I've got a back catalogue in my drawer, and sometimes I pick up what I tend to do is, been over quite a few years, but my very, very, very first book in my 20s was like a kind of ghost time slip type story about an old house. But when occasionally I'll pick one off the shelf because I got them printed, and I'll just open a page randomly to see what I think. And I don't know how much my narrative voice has changed. That you can tell that I don't know, grown as a person maybe, but I think the voice is the same. And I think maybe, Tim, you might find that the people will be able to find links between those books that you can't see yourself, because it still is you. It's still coming from you, isn't it? And there probably will be a bit more humour. Maybe you'll find a subject that actually chimes in or something like that.
Well, so that's actually what the publisher said, and like I say, I'm very proud of my second book. It's just a different type of novel. And actually, the other thing that's quite similar, so I've said it's very different, but the second one does have a load of animals in it, so there's definitely a theme going through. So it's not that hard to link them, in all honesty. It's just a bit. It's not. It doesn't start with joke, if you know what I mean. That's probably the biggest difference, I guess. But yeah, it's full of animals, so I've clearly got a thing. It wasn't intentional. Just
why not? Yeah. And Nicola, I know you've written a book, or you're working on a book, isn't it, to do with we were talking about it sometime, about someone's husband getting injured and having to.
Yes. A woman who she's about to divorce her husband, and then he's in a very serious accident. So it's a kind of, well, what's she going to do now situation. So it's not inherently funny, but I sort of to go back to the question is, yes, I do think that there is a sort of a pressure on authors to sort of stick to being on brand, if you like. And once you've written one type of book, I think publishers very much like you to sort of stay in that genre, unless you become so successful like Kate Atkinson that you can do what you like, which would be lovely. But I'm happy with that, because those are the books that I like writing, and probably, if I'm honest, the only books that I really can write. So I think there's a spectrum, and some of my books might be more funny and some might be more serious, but they will always both have elements of both, I think.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I think I like that idea that there is a spectrum, and all of us have said, I think, that we're not kind of right on it's basically a joke book, and we're not right at the dark end, but that, yeah, within that there's a range for sure. And I suppose that's where we could come back to that question about subjects and what subjects you address. Well, there's more humour in some subjects, but all subjects can be looked at with a humorous bent, I guess. Okay, back to these pre-asked questions. Let's see. Do you think, so someone's asked, should every character be likeable? Does anyone want to have a go at that? Maybe Kat?
Yes, I was just going to say I'm aware that we're kind of coming up to our time, but we should say that the organisers have said we can have a few minutes more because we're also riveting, that we know you're going to want to stick around for just a few extra minutes while we answer all your questions. So what was it about? Do all characters have to be likeable?
Likeable.
No, absolutely not. Actually, I'm really glad you asked this question. And the reason it makes me laugh is because my very first draft of the scoop, I gave to a good friend to read and to give me some honest feedback, thinking that she would tell me it was great. And what she actually said was, "I just don't like your main character. She's really not likable." But that wasn't what I was going for. I was going for the main character should be, should be real, but should be likable. And, like we said with Uplit, you want to be able to empathize with that character, because why would you bother going, reading through the whole book and going on their journey with them if you don't find them likable, or if not likable, then empathizable with? And she was basically telling me that she wasn't. Please, readers, I have changed that character completely since then. So she's now really, really empathizable and likable. But I think there is that difference, isn't there, between likable and someone you can empathize with. You can have someone with a lot of faults, and maybe that's where we come back to kind of Eleanor Oliphant, who a very kind of broken character in many ways, but you can very much empathize with her.
That's a great answer. You're right, we're about the time, so maybe I should pass back over to you, Kat, to do the
Has anyone got a burning answer on that one before we wrap up?
I just want to, just quickly then, I think the kind of the worse the character, the more horrible they are, the more fun they are to write.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah, very much. That's a good comment to end on, actually. So I will wrap it up, because I'm aware that people have probably made plans for making copious cups of tea before line of duty to keep them up. So thanks very much, everyone, for coming. Particularly thank you to all of our lovely authors. And I hope we've given you a taste for Uplit. We have dropped the links, hint, hint, for all of our books in the chat. And also you can buy any of the books from all of the festival in the Stay at Home Literary Festival book shop. And the link for that is on any of the promotional materials. Oh, Tim, come back. Tim, we haven't said goodbye. Ah, okay. I see. Now, I guess now we know who it was. Well, that's given the game away. I love that someone thought it was me. Well, all it remains for me to say is thank you very much and good night. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.